Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's exciting webinar entitled How to Focus in a World of Information Overload, 5 proven ways to overcome stress and strain in the workplace. I just want to let you know that during the webinar, you're welcome to submit questions via the chat window on your screen, and we will answer the questions at the end. You'll also receive a link to a recording of this webinar within a day of the webinar, and you'll get that via email. With that, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, David Lavenda. David is a recognized international expert on information overload. During his 20 years of experience working with organizations on collaboration strategies and implementing information and knowledge management solutions, David has developed a unique and practical approach to addressing the root causes of today's information overload. His academic research focuses on uncovering patterns from past information revolutions and applying past lessons learned for dealing with today's overload. Okay, David, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Dina. Thank you for that introduction. Technology is taking over your life by overwhelming you with information. Admit it, you're distracted, you're stressed, you are depressed. That's why relationships are suffering. We've even had to create a new word to define what it means to ignore someone in order to pay attention to a phone or other mobile device. It's called phubbing. Yes, phubbers, we're at a breaking point, and it's only getting worse. And if you believe you need to get a handle on your digital technology before it's too late, folks, you're in the right place. So fasten your seatbelts because you're about to embark on a whirlwind tour through the world of information overload. Before we get to that, let's start with some numbers about how bad it truly is. We're drowning in information, and these are the four numbers you need to know. 100, 11, 1, and 100 billion. So let's keep it simple. Here's what you have. We receive about 100 emails a day. That's about 15 for every working hour, or one email every 4 minutes. So you can just hear that ding, 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 ding of the notifications coming in all day. We use 11 more apps per day for work. One study even discovered that we toggle between these apps about 37 times every hour. So it's no surprise that people waste so much time looking for information. 41% of workers waste at least an hour a day searching for stuff. Now think about that. That's 10 wasted days every year. Think about that. You're wasting all your vacation days looking for stuff that you know already exists. That's crazy. And lastly, there are 100 billion WhatsApp messages sent every day. To give you some idea of how big 100 billion is, if you lived 100 billion minutes, that would be 190,000 years. And 100 billion miles is about 200,000 round trips to the moon. Let's just say that's an awful lot of messages, and it's much more than WhatsApp. It's Slack, it's Teams. All that stuff is contributing to the cacophony of messages that make it just impossible to focus today. And it's not just the load, it's also the expectation about how fast we're supposed to respond. There's no time to breathe. These are the numbers you need to know for that. 15, 3, and 9. We're expected to answer emails in as little as 15 minutes. Now remember, we got 100 emails to process. So if you answer 4 every hour, you can complete that in 25 hours. So you better get cracking on that to finish it. And if you thought email was bad, text messaging is far worse. You don't even get a 15-minute respite for text. No. With those, we read those immediately within 3 minutes of receiving them. And we don't sit idle with those either because we answer those within 9 seconds. There's literally no time to breathe. I'm exhausted just talking about this here. So I know what you're thinking. So what? That's the way it is. Just suck it up and get on with your life. Not so fast, Kimosabi. This frenetic pace is taking its toll. I mean, just look at this woman. Do you think she's having a good day with all this load she's got? So let's break it down. The problem is loss of productivity. It's easy to see how so much the load reduces productivity as we just continuously and relentlessly struggle to plug this information dam. And that means that there's no time to focus because we can't think clearly. We're just trying to keep up with all the tasks running in. And that lack of focus leads to poor decision making because there's no time to think things through. And that, my friends, leads to the ultimate problem, your health. Study upon study show that the effects of information overload induce stress, fatigue, and depression, all things that degrade relationships and well-being. So in short, this is a big deal. This is, in fact, is a huge deal. So what can be done? Well, if you think about it, since digital technology is new, we've never encountered anything like this before. Or have we? Look at this picture of ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets. Imagine you're a Sumerian tax collector who needs to comb through these tablets of grain production numbers to find out how much each farmer in the village owes. Now, that's not so easy, is it? There's a lot of information here. All of a sudden, digging through your email inbox doesn't seem so bad after all, does it? To gain some perspective on this problem, let's look at what some industry leaders are saying about information overload today. So here's a great quote. Fill the world with information that is foolish, ignorant, malignant, libelous, mad, impious, and subversive, and there will be a flood that even things that might have done some good lose all their goodness. Now, who said this? Was this Chris Hughes, Facebook co-founder and now staunch anti-social media activist? It sure sounds like the things he's been saying recently. But no, this was said back in 1525 by scholar and polymath Erasmus of Rotterdam. Find it hard to believe? What was he railing against? I mean, there was no Facebook back then. Well, there may not have been face, but there definitely was book. Let's wind the clock back to the year 1400. At this time in history, the most learned person on the planet had never seen more than a few hundred books in their lifetime. In fact, most people had never seen any books. Most people couldn't even read. But 50 years later, the printing press was invented and the race was on. And 50 years after that, in 1500, there were already 20 million books in print, more than had been published up to that point in history. Books were literally flying off the press. What exactly were they reading about it? You know, it sure wasn't Harry Potter or Tom Clancy. No, this was more about ancient classics and new books about explorers returning from the New World with massive discoveries in geography, zoology, and botany. The enormous trove of information overwhelmed not only the printers, but also the scholars who tried to keep up with all this new information. So to deal with all this overload, people back then devised new tools. So they invented new books, like the encyclopedia, or recommendation books called Florilegia. They even came up with something called a commonplace book, which was literally books of cutting and pasting pieces of paper into a scrapbook, and also a concordance, which was an early index. So today we basically have the same tools, except they have digital versions of them. We call those Wikipedia, Reddit, Yelp, Pinterest, OneNote, Evernote, Notion, and Search. Another thing that happened with print is that books became standardized. So for the first time, every copy of the book looked exactly the same. It had the same layout. And this prompted what I call in-book tools to help you find things and orient yourself within the text. So things like table of contents, index, even page numbers and chapter headings, which were brand new. These tools were as revolutionary in those days as our digital equivalents are today for finding information on screens, like search, hyperlinks, tags, bookmarks, things like that. Let's take another look at a real world example of information overload. Here's another quote. The merchant goes home after a hard day of work and excitement and a late dinner, trying amid the family circle, trying to forget business, when he's interrupted by London, and the poor man must dispatch his dinner as hurriedly as possible in order to send his message to California. A businessman of the present day must be continually on the jump. The poor merchant has no other way to secure a living for his family. Well, this sure sounds familiar. It was written by a New York businessman, W.E. Dodge, who's basically complaining about interruptions and distractions enabled by new technologies that are creating stress in his life. When do you think this was written? Maybe this year? Maybe 2010? No! This was written in 1868. And what was Dodge railing about? He was railing about the telegraph. Can you imagine how this old technology could have been so disruptive in his life? To understand how this worked and what the problem was, we need to look at the telegraph in context of the time. So let's set the Wayback Machine to 1840. In 1840, information traveled as fast as the horse or a boat would take it. So, for example, it took 16 weeks to send a message from Washington to Los Angeles. Today, in that amount of time, you can send a spaceship to the moon and back 130 times. I mean, think about that. That's just insane. The change, the scale of change that happened in this time. It took a breezy 2 weeks to reach London. In that amount of time, the Concorde would have made the round trip 134 times. So clearly we can see that in 1840, life was moving at a much slower pace. But fast forward 20 years, and in this short period of time, the speed of information transmission sped up faster than any other time in history, including today. With the invention of the telegraph, information traveled at the speed of light for the first time. That change brought on by the telegraph was more impactful than any information-related change that any of us have ever experienced. All of a sudden, information go Washington, Los Angeles in a few minutes, to London almost instantaneously. Mr. Dodge was certainly not embellishing the stress he felt. It was real in those days, and we can certainly empathize with him. But yet, even in the day of the telegraph, people figured out how to get information under control. They had different inventions than they had in the time of the printing press, but they got things under control. They invented revolutionary tools like the memo to summarize information. Today we use email. They had the pigeonhole desk to organize papers. Today we use application feeds. They had filing cabinets to organize documents. Today we use Google Drive, Dropbox, and OneDrive, and other products like that. They even had their own version of document replication methods to churn out and overload their own workers with paper in those days. Things like the typewriter, mimeograph, carbon paper. Today we use similar things, digital versions of that, like PDF, Microsoft and Google productivity tools, and HTML files. They all pretty much fulfill the same job as those old tools. Different era, different tools, same solutions. Do you see a pattern here? We should be able to learn something from the past to overcome today's information overload problems. If only it were that simple. Because this time, for the first time, it is different. What has changed this time around? Well, to understand that, we need to see how technologies are adopted. This is a typical technology adoption curve. You can see it demonstrates how technologies like the telegraph, the TV, the internet are adopted over time. So first, people seeking new products and services adopt some new technology. These are typically people we call innovators or early adopters, and they're a small percentage of the population. But then eventually, the majority, the early majority, late majority of users start to use it. And eventually then even the laggards join in. And if it's a successful technology, it reaches almost 100% adoption. At this point, we can say the innovation is not new. It's the new normal. It's just how things are. So think about the telephone or the television. They just are. Nobody would think of those as innovations today. Then eventually a new disruptive technology comes along and the whole process starts all over again. So think about, for example, the smartphone replacing Nokia handsets. And this pattern has always been this way. Well, it's always been this way up until recently. So this graph shows when some popular technologies were introduced and how many years it took to reach a 25% adoption rate in the US. So you can see from the graph, for example, on the left side that the telephone was introduced in 1876, and it took 35 years to reach a quarter penetration rate in the US. And what you can see is as the height of the graph shows how long the technology took to be adopted. So as we move from left to right and we move forward in time, you can see that the amount of time it takes for a technology to be adopted starts to shrink. Time is speeding up. So like most recently, we can see here, that things like social media introduced in 2005 took about 3 years. The smartphone introduced a few years later took also 3 years to reach that level of adoption. And the tablet computer introduced a couple years later only took 2 years. So this time is shrinking. And this is really significant because that makes the big difference. And that's why it's different. In the good old days, adoption cycles were slow enough so you could develop tools and adapt before the disruption, the next wave of disruption struck. Now, technology is moving so fast that the next wave of innovation washes over us before we've even figured out how to deal with the last round. That, my friend, is what makes the difference. We can't deal with all that information overload created by new innovations because we can't adapt coping strategies fast enough. So it sounds like we just give up, but there are things that we can do. And to answer that question, we need to understand the root causes of information overload. So in the simplest terms, when you need to make a decision, you need information. The more information you have, the better decision you can make. And that's true up to a point. But beyond a certain amount of information, you simply can't process the information fast enough to take it into account to make your decision. And that's what we call the point of information overload. And there are actually three ways that you can become overloaded by information. So kind of the most obvious way is too much information. You have just too much quantity. So here's an example. Say you're a legislator and you need to read a 1,000-page report overnight to make a decision about how to vote on a bill. It ain't going to happen. But there are other forms of load as well. So disjointed information. You may have not a lot of information, but it just may be in a form that's hard to digest. So think about information spread across multiple sources or stored in different formats. Maybe you're trying to think about a vacation and you have dates and budget, and then you start to look at all the travel sites, and because they all have different information in different formats, it's really hard to reconcile all the choices, and you find it really hard to make that decision. So the information isn't overwhelming, but it's hard to process. And lastly, time pressure creates overload, even when information might be really quite small. Think about an emergency room at the hospital. Patient comes in critical condition, and the doctor has their medical history, and that medical history may not be a lot of information, but because the doctor needs to decide fast, they can't process it all, and they have a difficult time making a quick decision. So these are the three types of load, and let's take a look at each one of those, how each one of those today manifests itself in our daily lives. So too much information. This one's the most obvious one. Just some examples. You're spending 7 hours on the internet a day. These are all from studies and surveys that have been done fairly recently. You're consuming 12 and a half hours of media a day. 12 and a half hours. It's almost all your waking hours. It's just insane how much time is being spent consuming media. We said before that you're getting 100 emails a day, and there's an average. You don't need to answer all those emails, but even if you're answering 40 of them, you still need to process the 100 in order to decide what you need to answer. And social media goes without saying. It's out of control. People are spending almost 3 hours a day on social media. As we said before, there's 100 billion WhatsApp messages sent every day, and that's over 50 a day for every WhatsApp user. And we obviously know that there's a lot of heavy users, and probably some who aren't using all that much. So heavy users are just being, totally snowed under. And that's on top of all the other stuff that you're doing. So it's no wonder that we find it so difficult. But let's look at the quality of information. So here it's just more than the sheer quantity, as I said. And I said a lot of us are using tons of apps at work, and over a quarter of U.S. workers are using over 11 apps. And that's, when information is spread across all these different places, we don't know where it is. A lot of times you got an answer from somebody, you don't know which app it's in, you start digging for it, and you spend hours a day looking for that stuff. And that's why, the New York Times found that we're changing windows, almost 37 times an hour. I mean, think about that. That's once every minute and a half we're switching windows. I mean, it's impossible to understand how we can even get stuff done. And the other studies show that office workers are interrupted 11 times an hour. It's a miracle that we can get anything done at all. And a lot of this stuff now is coming from not just email, but from collaboration apps like Slack and Teams and WhatsApp. Messaging that's from multiple channels that without any context about how they fit together whatsoever. And then there's the time limitations. We're expected to make decisions and make decisions quick. As I said before, we're expected to answer emails within 15 minutes. And email was once the fastest mode of communication, but now it's absolutely glacial compared to text messages, where we answer those within 3 minutes of being received. And mobile phone notifications are clicked within even 30 seconds. I mean, it's just getting faster and faster and faster. And the problem is that once we're interrupted, it takes us about 10 to 15 minutes to return to the original task because we're just distracted. It takes time to get back into focus, to get back to what we're doing. So, folks, all those numbers, I think we're doomed. I think there's not. It looks bleak. That is, of course, unless we could take a step back and let's see what's worked in the past. As we saw from the printing press and the telegraph, there are time-proven strategies for dealing with information overload. We just need to stop and figure out how to apply those to today's insane rate of change. And that's what I want to do today, is look at a few of these. So cracking information overload for you and your organization is definitely more than we can cover in this 1-hour webinar. But I do think I can provide some insights into at least how to approach the problem. Let's start with the 4 classic strategies for dealing with information: queuing, filtering, delegating, and ignoring. And let's take just a brief look at each one and some examples of how you can implement this. So storing or queuing means putting aside new information until there's time to focus. So here's some examples of how you can practice this strategy. You can set expectations with peers that you're only going to be answering emails twice a day. This, if nothing else, will reduce your own stress because you won't be thinking that people are waiting for an answer from you. Next, maybe turn off some notifications. Not everything needs to be addressed right away, and eliminating as many interruptions as you can eliminate, the more you can be able to focus longer. There's read later tools like Pocket and Instapaper that let you catalog stuff you want to read out later on. So something pops up, you don't want to get sidetracked and stop working on that budget so you can read that new recipe for lemon drizzle cake. That can definitely wait for later. And for goodness sakes, mute unimportant WhatsApp group notifications. Of course, there's ones from family and maybe from the kids' school that you need to stay on top of. But honestly, getting the scoop on which tree removal company your neighbors recommend, that can probably wait for the evening commute. That's just not so important. It needs to be addressed right away. Second strategy is filtering or selecting information, which means prioritizing information to deal with first. So some good examples of how to do this: use email inbox rules to surface only those emails that need to be dealt with immediately, and relegate the others to being dealt to a lower status. Most email products have this. You can set rules about where to put emails, even forward it to other people, by subject, by who it's being sent by, keywords. These are usually quite flexible, and you can get a lot of mileage out of this. Some email products also now provide a focused email inbox, which automatically put things in a higher priority, lower priority. So those are good. If you're not using that feature, you should definitely take advantage of that. Use Google Alerts to track important keywords and people. I mean, if you want to follow the latest in the world of competitive duck herding, Google Alerts is the way to go. You don't want to waste your time combing the internet for updates on this kind of stuff all the time. Just get a digest at the end of every day or every week, and you're good to go. A lot of time saved with this one. And like I said before, use notifications only for things that are really important, like messages from important clients. Every application wants to send you notifications. They all want to be top of mind. It's popping up at the bottom of your screen. It's popping up on your phone. They're all set to send you notifications by default. Turn those off. Just keep the ones that are most important. And lastly, instead of going to LinkedIn or any of the social media and start infinite scrolling through your feed, follow people and groups that you're interested in, so that you get the information you need without having to spend the time looking down through it all. The next strategy is delegating. And one of the biggest time sucks there is reading through endless email threads. This one. You get an email and you see that it's addressed to 10 people, and then somebody in the group answers it, and that goes to 10 people. These are classic, in sales and marketing scenarios where somebody wants to make sure that everybody on the team is in the loop. these are just enormous time wasters because probably only one person needs to address that. So delegating is a great way to overcome this problem. It's an effective way to significantly cull this information. Appoint a person on your team to follow a specific distribution list. They'll be the one responsible for that list or making sure that the customer or supplier gets an answer. Or by topic, have people follow topics or app feeds. They're scouting out for important updates. And if something really important pops up, they'll alert the team. They're the ones who will tell the rest of the team that something needs to be done. You can reduce the wasted time that all the other people on the team are doing looking at all this stuff. This productivity hack alone can save gobs of time with absolutely no downside. So it's highly recommended. Last of the 4 strategies is ignoring information. And this is a great way to reduce load. The danger here, of course, is how do you do this and not miss that life-changing email or message that you need to do. So you got to do this carefully, but here's some practical suggestions on how to do this. First of all, stop being a doom scroller. You know, these are the folks who wake up in the morning, the phone's on the nightstand. The first thing they do is grab the phone and start going through the feeds, looking for the latest disaster that happened overnight. Stop doing that. You can get the same information from social media platforms. And even if you do that, reduce the number of those, reduce the number of social media platforms that you're following, reduce the number of news sites that you're following. You'll get the same amount of information by looking at fewer sites and just ignoring that information. You won't even notice anything. And if you really want to take the big step, start reducing the number of apps that you're using. So for example, tell people you're not, maybe internally, at least in your company, you're not using email. Tell people if they want to reach you, they'll reach you on Slack or Teams or WhatsApp. Don't send me an email. It's just another place I have to look. And you know, remember, we're using 11 apps every day. If we can reduce 1 or 2 of those, we'll go a long way to improve your quality of life. But there's more. I mean, we looked at kind of behavior strategies that you can use to improve your life by handling information. But I always like to say that technology giveth and technology taketh away. Technology tools can overload you, but also technology tools can make your life better. Using them wisely, they can improve your quality of life. Again, I'm going to just touch the tip of the iceberg. We need a much longer session to get into works best, especially what works best for you and your team, because a lot of this depends on how you and your organization work. But let's start with some, probably the biggest one is phone usage tips. Your phone's the biggest source of interruptions and distractions, so let's start here. Put that phone down. Just put it out of sight. You know, many studies show that the mere presence of a mobile phone on the table when you're working creates a distraction and stress. There's a study that was quoted in the New York Times that shows that putting your phone down reduces stress-inducing cortisol in the brain. You know, when you're working, you're not using your phone, put it in a drawer and put it on silent. It's not helping you. You don't need it. It'll improve your day. Simple thing, disable Face ID. You know, this is kind of a nudge that makes it harder for you to disable the to get access to your phone. And it doesn't sound like much, but everything that you do to make it a little bit harder to access your phone reduces that urge to instinctively pick it up. Similarly, it's been shown that if you turn off the color and the brightness of your screen, there's actually a setting that you can turn it on to make it black and white. Anything you can do to make your phone look less Candy Crush-like is proven to reduce that urge to pick it up and look for stuff. Likewise, take those time-sucking apps from the home screen and move them to somewhere else on the phone. That also reduces the urge to pick it up. And leave that phone at home just for short periods of time when you go out for a walk. Be mindful of your surroundings because you know, it just clears your mind. And this is one that I find is particularly helpful, is to limit tasks to computers. So things like managing your finances or online shopping, don't do it on your phone, even though all these things now have apps. By doing it on your computer, you do it at times when you're more focused and not on the go, and you'll be amazed how effective this is to free time up. Now, these nudges all add up. Each one by itself may not be great in its own sense, but used in tandem, they can definitely reduce the overload. Next, probably biggest time suck is email. And even though email is being usurped by messaging apps like WhatsApp and the collaboration apps like Teams and Slack, it's still a big time waster. And here's some ideas about how to get some of that time back. So use generate automated responses. You know, many people already use these today for like when you go on vacation or out of office messages that you can send automated responses. Then when you come back to the office, you don't have to respond to those emails. That reduces time. But you can make broader use of these. So for example, you're working on a project, you're not available, you can generate automated responses. And then when you come back, you'll have less stuff to plow through to get back on track. Some email programs now even support things like smart replies. So if you're in, like I say again, the sales or marketing, you get a lot of email requests for things like a product demo, pricing, contact information. You know, if you can automate these, you can reduce the email load and therefore only process those emails that you need a human to look at. This can vastly reduce, for certain people, can vastly reduce their load. And like I said this before, but set expectations with people that you're only going to be answering email periodically, not every day, and not every hour, maybe twice a day. And this can go a long way to eliminating interruptions and distractions that wreck your concentration. Now, collaboration tools are becoming increasingly important to our digital schedules, particularly during the COVID lockdowns. These things became a lifeline. And today, how we collaborate is probably the #1 area where you and your organization are benefiting from information strategies. This subject alone is a topic for a webinar. Maybe we'll do it another time. But let me leave you with a few ideas anyway. This is new, and therefore, I think people have a lot less experience, so there's a lot more room here to improve how we spend our day. I think one of the things is that, you know, when you start with these tools, you're going to start with meetings and chat, but quickly your organization is going to see the value of group chats and channels, and that's when it starts to get complicated because the number of groups grows exponentially, and it very quickly you'll see that it becomes untenable because you don't know where to look for updates. Information starts to appear in different channels. Setting the limits and rules for who can create groups and who should be a part of each team will go a long way to keeping the chaos down. Establish guidelines for where to talk about a particular topic. You know, you'll need to decide where to discuss specific topics. For example, you might want to talk about a customer in a customer success channel, while discussions about a particular use case, customer case, might be best handled in a group chat. Setting those up ahead of time, letting people know where to look, reduces that drag of having to toggle and searching for stuff. And lastly, establish guidelines about where to store specific content with these tools. A lot of times you'll be using attachments. So if you're dealing with a customer, the customer may have sent a proposal request or a pricing request, and you might want to be sharing that internally with other team members before you send it back. So you're going to use attachments, and then finding that afterwards is really hard to find those documents. So you might want to set up a channel or a group for each product, customer, or project, and then share relevant information only in that channel. Make it easy for people to find the documents they need to do their jobs. I can't stress how much each of these is now becoming a major burden for companies. There's a lot of work to be done here to streamline operations. While we're on the topic of collaboration, there's a tremendous amount to be said about how digital tools are helping people work remotely, mostly through meetings. That's initially where it started. And that's the key enabler is the virtual meeting, like products like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Meet. And as good as these tools are, their ease of use has actually created the fastest growing source of overload in the workplace. Again, dealing with this challenge is a topic for its own webinar because there's so much to be done here. But let me just leave you the few quick tips. You know, meeting, that could have been an email. That's becoming a popular aphorism. People have a hair trigger when it comes to pressing that invite meeting button, because when there's no one around to ask, the easiest thing to do is set up a meeting. But these are huge, huge time wasters. Create other ways for people to get quick answers other than them setting up a meeting just to get an answer to a question they may have. Another thing you can do, limit the time allotted to each meeting. I mean, even if you set up a meeting for the Now, the standard amount of time for a meeting to be 15 or 30 minutes. It might be enough. Maybe buffer times between meetings to allow them to go over if necessary. But when you set the expectations that a meeting is going to be an hour, there's the old law of preservation of meeting times, which means that all meetings will fill the time allotted to them. So if you set it for 15 minutes, it'll last 15 minutes. If you set it for an hour, it's going to last an hour. Setting a default time for less amount of time will reduce the amount of time wasted. Kind of related to that, limit the number of hours spent in meetings per day and per week. It's so easy to get Zoom fatigue, and after a while, staring at that screen isn't productive at all. So limiting the amount of meetings that you can have per week also is a great idea. Another thing is, if you are going to have a meeting, make sure that everyone's present. Make sure everyone has their camera on. You know, the modern day version of what used to be in audio conferencing, when you ask somebody a question and they say, what? Sorry, I was on mute. You know, they're not paying attention. So when people are nominally attending a meeting, but they're doing other things, their cameras off, they're probably not paying attention to what's going on. And this is really a double whammy, because they're not paying attention, but they aren't focused on the other thing they're doing either. So it's doubly wasting their time, and you're not getting what you need out of that meeting. So if you need them to be present, make sure they use their camera. If they don't need to be present, just let them go, and everyone's the wiser. So a little bit on time management. Well, you know, time's not strictly a digital technology. Managing time well will reduce your information overload significantly. So, you know, firstly, set aside times during the week. Set aside times during the day for deep work. You know, like when you're writing reports or articles, you want to shut off alerts and notifications. You know, there's a kind of a buzzword du jour of time blocking and time boxing and task batching. These are all things that are, you know, very popular today, but they really come down to the same things that we've always done, which is when you need to focus, eliminate distractions and interruptions. Secondly, go offline when you need to concentrate. You know, seclude yourself from these distractions. We saw before that if it takes 15 to 20 minutes to recover from interruptions, even one interruption an hour will just destroy your productivity. And don't multitask. There is no such thing as multitasking, no matter what women say. Just don't believe it. It's simply fast task switching, and it simply just doesn't work. Study upon study have shown that multitasking just causes fatigue and stress, and you don't get anything more done. Don't even attempt to do this. And perhaps lastly, take breaks during the day. You know, put away the devices, take a walk, smell the roses. Nature is the best replenisher of human batteries, and we should take advantage of that. Again, not a digital suggestion, but definitely something that'll improve the quality of life. Whew. So it's been a whirlwind. We've gone through a lot of stuff in 40 minutes. But I do want to leave you with 3 top takeaways that you can take with you, and you know, do stuff. Take it upon yourself. Firstly, I think we've shown that information overload is not new. There's a lot to be learned from history. What we showed here was really just 2 simple examples, but every time a new information revolution occurred, the society always came up with new tools to be able to address the challenges. All of those strategies have been adapted to the following revolutions, and there's just so much that we can learn. You know, that it's a shame that we always think that things are different, and that it's never been this way before. There's always something to learn. Times proven strategies can reduce overload. You know, there's things that are not related to particularly to technologies that we looked at that are just behavioral changes, you know, behavioral strategies. You just need to stop and think and not be reactive, and use those things, you know, queuing, ignoring, delegating. These are all things that we can do on a daily basis to you know, to think ahead to be able to improve quality of life. And there are a lot of tips that I shared, and tons more that we can get into at another opportunity about how to use the tools wisely to reduce distractions and interruptions. You know, there's a lot of things to do, particularly with the new collaboration tools, which are If we looked at that adoption curve, they're much earlier on the adoption curve than things like smartphones are. So we're still learning how to use those, and there's tons that we can do on a daily basis to get and to get a grip on work. And in the spirit of under promising and over delivering, I added a takeaway number 4. There's a ton more that can be done. There's new stuff coming down the pike all the time. There's new things that are going to be interrupting us. There's new tools. There's new ways to move information faster. Every one of them claims to be a productivity tool, but when you add just one more tool, productivity typically goes down, not up. So there's a lot to be learned about how to use these wisely. And on that subject, maybe a few steps. I'm available to speak and advise on those topics that we talked about. Maybe, just to give a couple of other ideas here about how to focus. So things like I talked about today, practical strategies to conquer information overload and increase productivity. I think there's a tremendous amount that can be learned from history of too much information. Here we just talked super briefly about printing press and telegraph, but there's so many information revolutions that occurred. Every one of them has something that we can learn from about how to conquer digital overload today. And that's just it. Not only is it's not only very practical, but it's also really interesting to see how things repeat themselves and how we can learn from those. Maybe a third topic is time-proven knowledge management practices that will set you free. There's a lot particularly here to do with collaboration tools. Email's kind of, like I say, it's a bit old already, but the new generation of collaboration tools that are coming down the pike, Teams is Microsoft Teams is developing all the time. There's new features. Zoom, Slack. Slack was purchased by Salesforce. There's going to be integration there, so there's going to be even more tools that do more things together. There's a lot of things that we're going to be able to do, or we should be doing, to improve the way we use those tools, so that they serve us and we don't have to serve them. With that, I invite you to stay in touch. You can reach me by email, follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or Medium. I figure with all the other notifications and sites that you're going to remove and delete after today's webinar, you're going to have lots more time to follow me and my updates. So I invite you to take advantage of that. And with that, we're going to move on to questions. And I'll ask Dina to see what we came up with questions, if any questions came in. So we'll see, maybe we'll wait for Dina, see if we got any questions along the way.
Me?
Yep. Okay.
Great.
All right, Dina, hear any questions come in while during the webinar?
Yep, I've got a couple. Hold on. All right. Here is the first one. You mentioned print and the telegraph. Were there other technologies that created this kind of overload?
Oh, there are tons. I mean, everything from the invention of text, of writing, the switch from an oral society to a written society, to the television, to everything in between. I mean, there's just, every time something new comes along, there's a lot of hand-wringing and complaining about how this new technology is making us stupid, how this new technology is ruining society, how we're not able to deal with it, and it's completely changing everything in a negative way. Like I said, each one of these is almost a topic for another webinar, but absolutely, tons of revolutions have created the same kind of havoc and chaos.
Right. Okay, very quickly, because we're a bit out of time, just one more question and then we'll answer the other questions via email. But what do you think will be the next source of overload that we should be looking out for? And what can we do about it?
That's a great question. I think it's hard to be a prophet in these days, but I think one thing that we should definitely be looking at is the metaverse. Not necessarily the Facebook metaverse, which I don't think is the one that's going to be as disruptive as they claim. Other ones are coming down the road, like Microsoft's Mesh metaverse, which is more intended for the business world. I think there's going to be, this whole level of immersion that what we're going to be dealing with is going to create a new order of magnitude of interruptions and chaos and difficulty in managing, and we're going to need to look at that and find new ways to adapt to those changes.
Right. So much to look forward to. David, thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And you will receive an email with a link to view this webinar again if you want to, and feel free to reach out if you want more information, and we look forward to meeting you again at our next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.